The spotlight hit my face like a revelation as I walked across that marble stage, crystal award glinting in my hands, cameras flashing from every direction like lightning in a storm. The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause, but all I could see were two faces in the front row turning completely pale, their confident smiles melting into expressions of pure shock. My parents sat there, mouths slightly open, hands frozen mid-clap, as the announcer's words echoed through the speakers like a verdict. Tonight's highest international honor goes to someone who, despite receiving absolutely no family financial support, built her own path to global success through sheer determination and resilience. Behind my confident smile was a lifetime of silence. 21 years of watching my twin sister get everything handed to her while I fought for scraps from their table of affection. Years of being told I was naturally independent, while she was sensitive and deserving. But that moment, that beautiful, vindictive moment of recognition, hadn't come from luck or charity. It had come from proving them wrong in ways they never saw coming, from turning their rejection into rocket fuel for my ambitions. From the outside, we looked like the perfect upper-middle-class Black American family. Matching designer outfits at Christmas dinner, pristine smiles in every social media post that my mother curated like a magazine spread. A beautiful 2-story house in suburban Atlanta with perfectly manicured gardens, granite countertops, and 2 luxury cars sitting in the circular driveway like trophies of success. Dad owned a successful architectural firm specializing in commercial developments. Mom managed high-end interior design projects for Atlanta's affluent neighborhoods. We vacationed in Martha's Vineyard every summer, attended private schools where tuition cost more than most families' annual salaries, and lived the kind of life that looked enviable from every angle. But if you looked closely, really closely, you'd notice the microscopic details that told a completely different story. The way my mother's perfectly manicured hand wrapped protectively around Sophia's shoulders in every family photo, fingers splayed possessively, while her touch on me was always brief, almost reluctant. The way my father's voice dropped to honey-sweet tones when Sophia spoke, leaning in to catch every word, but remained businesslike and distracted when I tried to share something. The way their eyes lit up when Sophia entered a room, like someone had just turned on all the lights, while my presence was acknowledged with polite nods. We were twins, born just 6 minutes apart on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. 6 tiny, insignificant minutes that somehow created a universe of difference in how we were perceived, loved, and valued. 6 minutes that determined who would be the golden child and who would be the afterthought. The earliest memory I have of this inequality was when we were 4 years old. I'd spent hours building an elaborate castle out of colorful blocks, carefully placing each piece to create towers and bridges, proud of my architectural masterpiece. When Mom walked into the playroom, Sophia immediately knocked it down with one sweeping motion, scattering blocks across the expensive hardwood floors. Instead of scolding Sophia, Mom knelt down and said, "Oh, sweetheart, were you trying to help Isabella rebuild it? How thoughtful." Then she turned to me, her voice notably cooler. "Isabella, clean this up and next time build somewhere. Sophia can't accidentally bump into it." That was the moment I learned that even my successes could be reframed as Sophia's intentions. When we were 7, and I fell off my bike during our family vacation to Cape Cod, scraping both knees until they bled through my white leggings, leaving me sobbing on the sandy path, Mom handed me a tissue from her designer purse and said matter-of-factly, "You're tough, Isabella. Clean yourself up and get back on. You can't let a little fall stop you." When Sophia got a paper cut from her craft project later that same day, a tiny nick on her index finger that barely drew blood, Mom dropped her iced coffee, rushed over with the entire first aid kit, cooing and fussing. "Oh, my precious baby, let Mama take care of you. Poor little angel, that must hurt so much." I watched from the corner, knees still burning under hastily applied band-aids, as Sophia milked the attention for the next hour, showing her barely visible cut to every adult we encountered, receiving sympathy and ice cream while I was told to stop limping. It's not that bad. The pattern never changed. It only crystallized, became more obvious, more painful as we grew older and more aware of the disparities. For our 8th birthday, a joint celebration, though it never felt like mine, Sophia received a custom-built dollhouse that Dad had commissioned from a local craftsman in Buckhead. 3 stories tall, complete with miniature furniture, working lights, and hand-painted details that must have cost thousands of dollars. I received a store-bought art set, the kind you could find at any Target, still in its plastic wrapper with a price tag that showed it cost less than the dollhouse's miniature chandelier. Isabella loves art, Mom explained to the gathered relatives and family friends, as if this somehow justified the glaring disparity. She's so creative and independent. She doesn't need elaborate toys like Sophia does. But I'd never said I loved art more than dollhouses. I'd never expressed any preference. The art set was simply cheaper, easier, and good enough for the child who was expected to be grateful for anything. For our 10th birthday, the inequality reached new heights. Sophia got a brand new pink bicycle with ribbons streaming from the handlebars, a basket decorated with artificial flowers, and her name painted in golden letters across the frame. I got her old blue one from 2 years prior, hastily repainted silver like that would somehow make it special, with scratches still visible through the new paint job and a squeaky chain that no one had bothered to fix. "It's practically new," Dad said, when he saw my disappointed face. "And silver is more mature than pink anyway. You're too sophisticated for all those frilly decorations." Sophisticated, mature, independent. These became the words they used to justify giving me less, while making it sound like a compliment. When Sophia forgot her science project the night before it was due in 5th grade, Mom stayed up until 3 in the morning, helping her build an elaborate volcano that erupted with perfect timing during the presentation. When I forgot my history report the same month, I got a lecture about responsibility and time management that lasted until my ears rang, and I had to present an obviously rushed project that I'd thrown together during lunch break. "Sophia gets overwhelmed easily," Mom explained when I asked why they had different standards for us. "She needs more support. You're naturally organized and capable. This kind of challenge is good for building your character." By middle school, I'd stopped expecting fairness or even basic equality. I studied quietly in my room while Sophia watched television with our parents in the family room, curled up between them on the leather sectional like the favorite child she'd always been. I did extra chores around the house for allowance money, cleaning bathrooms, organizing closets, washing cars. While Sophia simply asked and received whatever she needed, her requests met with indulgent smiles and open wallets. I learned to make my own after-school snacks, teaching myself simple recipes while Mom prepared elaborate treats for Sophia. Homemade cookies, fresh squeezed juices, perfectly arranged fruit plates with expensive organic ingredients. I walked myself to dental appointments and parent-teacher conferences when they were too busy attending Sophia's dance recitals and art exhibitions. I became fluent in independence not by choice, but by necessity. "Sophia needs more attention," I overheard Mom explaining to our aunt during one of their weekly phone calls, her voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. "She's more sensitive, more fragile. Isabella is naturally self-sufficient. She doesn't need as much from us. She actually seems to prefer doing things on her own. Independent, self-sufficient, natural." These words became my identity, whether I wanted them or not, whether they were true or not. They became the justification for every disparity, every moment of neglect, every time I was expected to figure things out while Sophia was coddled and supported. High school brought new levels of inequality that were harder to ignore or rationalize away. Sophia got driving lessons in Dad's silver BMW, complete with a professional instructor who came to the house twice a week, and her own car for her 16th birthday. A brand new white Mini Cooper with a red bow tied around the antenna like something from a commercial. I got a MARTA transit card and a part-time job at a local coffee shop called Peachtree Perk to save for driving lessons myself, spending weekends and afternoons after school serving lattes and cleaning tables, while Sophia went shopping at Lenox Mall with friends. When Sophia's grades slipped during her junior year, dropping to C's and D's in multiple subjects, they hired her a team of private tutors, one for calculus, one for AP English, one for French, and one for chemistry. These tutors came to our house, turning our dining room into a private classroom, complete with specialized materials and one-on-one attention that cost more per month than most families' mortgage payments. When I struggled with advanced calculus during the same period, Dad shrugged and said, "You're smart enough to figure it out. Use Khan Academy or stay after school for help. That's what resourceful students do." I did figure it out, spending hours in the school library after classes ended, working through problems with online tutorials and borrowed textbooks until my eyes burned from strain. But each time I solved my own problems, each time I managed without their help, I watched their expectations grow like a tumor. Isabella will handle it. Isabella doesn't need help. Isabella is fine on her own. Isabella likes being independent. The breaking point came during our senior year of high school, when both Sophia and I had developed the same dream, studying abroad in Canada. We'd both become obsessed with the idea of international education, particularly the prestigious exchange programs that promise not just academic excellence but life-changing cultural immersion, global networking opportunities, and the kind of experience that opened doors worldwide. It started innocently enough. Sophia came home one day with brochures she'd picked up from the guidance counselor, glossy publications featuring photos of snow-covered campuses, diverse groups of students laughing in modern dormitories, and testimonials from former exchange students who'd gone on to work for multinational corporations and prestigious international organizations. "Look at this," she said, spreading the brochures across our granite kitchen counter like treasure maps. "Can you imagine studying in Toronto or Vancouver, living in snow, meeting people from all over the world, becoming completely fluent in French?" I was immediately captivated. The programs looked incredible. Not just academically rigorous, but transformative in ways that staying in Georgia simply couldn't match. We spent weeks researching universities, comparing programs, and dreaming about our futures as international students. Both of us applied to multiple programs, spending hours crafting personal statements and essays about our goals, our dreams, our reasons for wanting to study abroad. Sophia applied to the University of Toronto's International Business Program and York University's Media Studies track. I applied to McGill University's Engineering Program and the University of British Columbia's International Development Studies. The application process was expensive. Fees for each application, costs for translated transcripts, money for English proficiency tests. But for once, our parents seemed equally invested in both our futures, paying for everything without complaint, attending information sessions together, asking thoughtful questions about program requirements and career outcomes. For a few months, we were united in this shared dream. Sophia and I would study together for additional standardized tests, quiz each other on Canadian geography and culture, and practice speaking French with exaggerated Quebec accents that made us both laugh until our stomachs hurt. It felt like we were finally equals in something that mattered, both working toward the same goal with the same level of family support. One evening in March, acceptance letters started arriving via email. Sophia screamed when she opened hers first. Accepted to the University of Toronto's International Business Program with a recommendation for the university's international student housing. I was right behind her, my hands shaking as I opened my laptop and found the email I'd been waiting for. Accepted to McGill University's Engineering Program with a partial merit scholarship that covered 30% of the tuition costs. We danced around the kitchen together, hugging and jumping like children, our excitement infectious and pure. For those few magical minutes, we were just twins sharing the biggest accomplishment of our lives. Mom and Dad emerged from their home office, smiling and taking pictures, talking about how proud they were of both their girls, how this was the beginning of amazing adventures. "My daughters, the international students," Dad said, wrapping us both in a rare group hug. "I can't believe how far you've both come." That night, I went to bed planning our futures. Sophia and I, conquering Canada together, finally equals in something that mattered, both supported and celebrated by our parents. I imagined us FaceTiming each other from our respective universities, comparing experiences, supporting each other through the challenges of living abroad. But dreams have a way of shattering quietly, in overheard conversations and whispered planning sessions that reveal the truth behind polite facades. I was coming downstairs for water around midnight, padding barefoot across the cool hardwood floors, when I heard their voices drifting from the living room. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of Dad's reading lamp, and they thought we were asleep, so they spoke freely, their words carrying clearly through the silence. "We need to make the final decisions about the exchange programs," Mom said, her voice calm and businesslike, like she was discussing vacation plans instead of our futures. "The deposit deadlines are coming up soon." My heart began to race with excitement. If they were discussing deposit deadlines, that meant they were moving forward with both our programs, didn't it? We'll pay for Sophia's program in full, Mom continued, and I smiled in the darkness. The tuition, housing, flights, spending money, everything she needs for the full year. I want her to have the complete experience without worrying about money. My smile widened. If they were doing that for Sophia, surely they'd do the same for me. Maybe even more, since my program was slightly less expensive and I'd already received a partial scholarship. What about Isabella? Dad's voice cut through my anticipation like a blade. The pause that followed lasted an eternity. I gripped the stair railing, holding my breath, waiting for them to discuss my funding package with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for Sophia's. Mom's response hit me like ice water in my veins. Isabella is clever. She'll figure something out. She always does. Besides, she got that partial scholarship. She doesn't need us like Sophia does. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. She'll figure something out. She doesn't need us. But the scholarship only covers 30%, Dad said, and for a moment I hoped he was advocating for me. The remaining costs are still substantial. Isabella is resourceful, Mom replied with the casual dismissiveness I'd grown to hate. She can get student loans, find additional scholarships, maybe even work while she's there. This kind of challenge will be good for her character development. Dad's agreement was even worse than her initial dismissal. You're right. Sophia needs our support more. She's never been good with financial responsibility or stress. Isabella is naturally independent. This will actually be good for her, learning to manage everything herself. I stood there in the darkness, listening to them plan Sophia's golden future while casually dismissing mine with the same words they'd used my entire life. The program cost approximately 45,000 Canadian dollars for the full year. Tuition, housing, meal plans, textbooks, health insurance, and basic living expenses. My partial scholarship covered about 14,000. The remaining 31,000 might as well have been $1 million. They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing flight arrangements for Sophia, the best neighborhoods for her to live in, whether they should set up a Canadian bank account for her convenience. They planned her adventure with the same careful attention they'd given to every other advantage in her life, while expecting me to figure out an amount of money that represented more than most American families made in a year. I listened until I couldn't bear any more, then crept back to my room and sat on my bed in the darkness, staring at my acceptance letter from McGill pinned to my bulletin board like a cruel joke. All those months of shared excitement, shared dreams, shared planning had been an illusion. In the end, even this, the biggest opportunity of our lives, was just another chance for them to demonstrate who they valued more. I didn't confront them that night. What would I say? That I was tired of being the strong one? That just once I wanted them to choose me first? That I needed them too, even if I'd learned to hide that need behind a mask of independence? Instead, I sat there making lists in my head. Student loan options, additional scholarship opportunities, part-time work possibilities. I was already doing what they expected me to do, figuring it out alone. The next morning at breakfast, they broke the news with the kind of forced enthusiasm that made my stomach turn. Girls, Dad announced, spreading organic almond butter on his whole grain toast, like this was just another casual family discussion. We've made some decisions about the exchange programs. Sophia looked up from her acai bowl, eyes bright with anticipation. I forced myself to keep eating my cereal, even though everything tasted like cardboard. Sophia, Mom began, her voice warm with pride, we're going to fully sponsor your program at the University of Toronto. Full tuition, housing, spending money, everything you need for the most amazing year of your life. Sophia squealed, jumping up from her chair to hug them both, nearly knocking over her fresh-pressed orange juice in the process. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. This is incredible. I can't believe this is really happening. They basked in her gratitude, hugging her back, taking pictures of the moment like it was a holiday worth commemorating. I sat there watching the scene unfold, waiting for them to turn their attention to my program, to discuss my funding, to show even a fraction of the same excitement for my future. Finally, Sophia's celebration died down enough for her to ask the question I'd been dreading. What about Isabella's program? Are you paying for hers too? The room fell silent. Mom's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, and Dad cleared his throat in that way he did, When he was about to deliver news he knew wouldn't be well received. "Well," Mom began, her voice taking on that carefully measured tone she used when she was about to justify something unjustifiable, "Isabella received a scholarship, which is wonderful. We think it's important for her to learn financial responsibility by figuring out the remaining costs herself." She delivered these words like they were a gift, like being forced to finance my own education was somehow more valuable than being supported. "She's always been more independent than you," Dad added, jumping in to support Mom's narrative. "This kind of challenge will be good for her character. Isabella is naturally resourceful. She'll find a way." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Sophia's face fell slightly as she began to understand the disparity, but she didn't argue. She'd learned, just like I had, that some battles weren't worth fighting, that questioning their decisions only led to lectures about gratitude and attitude adjustment. "Of course," I said, my voice steady as glass, though my hands were shaking under the table. "I understand completely. Thank you for believing in my ability to handle this independently." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was thanking them for abandoning me, but I understood more than they realized. I understood that I was truly on my own, that their love had always come with conditions and comparisons, and that some dreams required sacrifices that others would never have to make. That afternoon, while Sophia spent hours on FaceTime with friends, excitedly planning her Canadian adventure, I walked to the Decatur Public Library and began researching every possible funding option. I applied for 19 different international scholarships that week, each application requiring essays, references, and documentation. I reached out to McGill's financial aid office, explaining my situation and asking about additional scholarships, work-study programs, and emergency funding options. I researched Canadian student visa requirements for part-time employment, looking into campus job opportunities, tutoring possibilities, and internship programs that might provide both income and experience. I even looked into educational loans, though the interest rates and repayment terms made my stomach clench with anxiety. Every day after school, I would stop by the library and spend hours filling out applications, writing essays, and crafting appeals. I became an expert in scholarship databases, financial aid terminology, and the bureaucratic language of need-based funding. My browser history was filled with searches for international student funding, emergency educational loans, and working while studying abroad. Meanwhile, Sophia's acceptance packet grew thicker every week. Orientation materials, housing assignments, course catalogs, flight booking information, shopping lists for Canadian winters, and invitation letters for parent send-off events. Our kitchen table became Sophia's command center, covered with brochures, forms, and planning documents for her fully funded adventure. Weeks turned into months. My email inbox filled with rejection letters that became increasingly painful to read. "Thank you for your application, but due to the competitive nature of this program," became the most devastating phrase in the English language. "While your qualifications are impressive, we regret to inform you," felt like personal attacks on my worth and potential. Each rejection felt like confirmation of what my parents had always implied, that I wasn't quite worthy enough, special enough, deserving enough for the same opportunities that came so easily to Sophia. The federal government's international education scholarships were awarded to students with perfect grades and extensive extracurricular activities. I had good grades but not perfect ones, and my extracurriculars were limited by my part-time job schedule. Private foundation scholarships went to students with demonstrated financial need who could provide extensive documentation of family income. But my parents' successful business disqualified me, despite their unwillingness to help. Corporate scholarships required specific career commitments and often had age restrictions or regional requirements that I didn't meet. International organization scholarships were incredibly competitive, receiving thousands of applications for just a handful of awards. By May, with just 3 months until the program's start date, reality began to set in with devastating clarity. I'd received 2 partial scholarship offers, one for $2,000 and another for $1,500, barely enough to cover my flight to Canada, let alone living expenses for a year. Meanwhile, Sophia had received her final housing assignment, a modern dormitory in downtown Toronto, her course schedule, carefully selected to include the most interesting electives, and detailed instructions for her pre-departure orientation. She'd already started buying winter clothes and planning weekend trips to Montreal and Vancouver. By June, With Sophia's departure just 2 months away, I had to face the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't going to Canada. My dreams of international education, of being equals with Sophia in something that mattered, of proving myself on a global stage were crumbling into expensive dust. The night I finally accepted defeat, I sat in my room staring at my acceptance letter from McGill, now just a cruel reminder of opportunities I couldn't afford. Outside my window, I could hear Sophia on the phone with friends, excitedly discussing her upcoming adventure, her voice filled with the kind of joy I would never experience. I thought about writing to McGill to officially decline their offer, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I carefully folded the letter and tucked it into my desk drawer, like preserving a dream that would never come true. The next morning, Sophia found me in the kitchen making coffee before anyone else was awake. "Bella?" she said softly, using the nickname she'd called me since we were children. "Are you okay? You've seemed really quiet lately." I looked at my sister, my twin, my genetic equal who'd somehow been born into a completely different life, and saw genuine concern in her eyes. For a moment, I considered telling her everything, how it felt to be constantly overlooked, how much it hurt to watch her receive everything I'd been denied, how devastated I was to lose this opportunity that meant everything to me. Instead, I smiled and poured coffee into her favorite mug. "I'm fine. Just thinking about senior year ending, big changes coming." She accepted the coffee and my deflection with visible relief. It was easier for everyone if I continued to be fine, continued to be strong, continued to require nothing from anyone. 2 days before Sophia's departure, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. If I couldn't go to Canada, I would bring the world to me. I started learning French through free online courses, spending hours each day mastering pronunciation, grammar, and cultural nuances. If I couldn't have international experience through travel, I'd create it through language acquisition and cultural study. I signed up for free online courses from prestigious international universities, building a self-directed curriculum in international relations, global business, and cross-cultural communication. I joined every international club and organization in Atlanta, volunteering for events, festivals, and programs that connected me with foreign exchange students, international business professionals, and cultural organizations. I began tutoring local students who were preparing for international exams and study abroad programs, earning money while building cross-cultural communication skills. When Sophia left for the airport, surrounded by our parents' tearful goodbyes and excited well wishes, I hugged her tightly and whispered, "Have the most amazing year of your life." I meant it. Her opportunities didn't diminish my worth, even if our parents' favoritism made it feel that way. After she left, with her room empty and the house strangely quiet without her enthusiastic energy, I threw myself into my alternative plan with the kind of desperation that breeds innovation. I enrolled in Georgia State University's International Affairs program, paying my own tuition with money I'd saved from my coffee shop job and a small academic scholarship I'd earned based on my high school grades. While my classmates complained about difficult professors and heavy reading loads, I approached every assignment like my life depended on it, because it did. Professor Elena Martinez noticed my dedication first. She taught international business communications and had spent decades building connections throughout Latin America, Europe, and North America. Her classes were notoriously difficult, requiring students to conduct real business negotiations in multiple languages and present complex international case studies to simulated corporate boards. After class one day, during my second semester, she pulled me aside. "Isabella, your work is exceptional. Your analysis of the U.S.-Canadian trade relationship was graduate-level quality. Are you interested in real-world application?" "What do you mean?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. "I consult for several multinational companies that are expanding their operations in the southeastern United States. They need someone who's bilingual, detail-oriented, culturally aware, and hungry to learn. The pay isn't much at first, but the experience could be invaluable for someone with your ambitions." I didn't hesitate for even a second. "Yes, absolutely. When can I start?" That part-time consulting position changed the entire direction of my life. I started working with Canadian companies that were expanding into American markets, helping them navigate cultural differences, communication barriers, and regulatory requirements. My French lessons proved incredibly useful when dealing with Quebec-based businesses. My tutoring experience had made me comfortable working with diverse teams and explaining complex concepts to people with different cultural backgrounds. The work was fascinating and challenging in ways that traditional classroom learning never could be. I was conducting market research, translating business documents, facilitating video conferences between American and Canadian executives, and even traveling to client meetings in different states across the Southeast. Within 6 months, I wasn't just helping these companies. I was anticipating their needs, identifying opportunities they hadn't considered, and developing strategies that impressed executives with decades more experience than me. Companies started requesting me specifically for their projects. Within a year, I had built relationships with businesses in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary, the same cities where Sophia was posting cheerful photos of snow days and cultural events. While she was attending classes and making friends, I was building professional networks that spanned continents. Professor Martinez became more than a teacher. She became a mentor and eventually a friend. She introduced me to other professors, recommended me for advanced courses, and eventually suggested I apply for a recognition program I'd never heard of. The State Department's International Leadership Excellence Award, she explained over coffee one afternoon at a cafe near the Georgia State campus. It's administered by the U.S. Department of State, in partnership with several international organizations. Highly competitive, but your profile is absolutely perfect. I laughed, stirring sugar into my latte. I don't have any international experience. I've never even left Georgia. That's exactly what makes you special, she said, leaning forward with excitement. You've created global connections from right here. You've proven that opportunity doesn't require privilege, that innovation comes from necessity, and that some of the best international professionals are the ones who've had to work hardest for their opportunities. She explained that the award recognized young Americans who had demonstrated exceptional international leadership potential while overcoming significant obstacles. It wasn't about who had traveled the most or studied at the most expensive programs. It was about who had created the most impact with the fewest advantages. The selection committee includes ambassadors, business leaders, and international organization representatives, she continued. Winners receive recognition from the State Department, connections with global companies and graduate programs, and opportunities that most people spend decades trying to access. The application process was intensely demanding. Personal essays about leadership philosophy and career goals, portfolio submissions demonstrating international work and cultural competency, letters of recommendation from academic and professional references, a comprehensive interview process conducted in English, French, and Spanish. I worked on the application for weeks, crafting every word with precision, gathering documentation of my consulting work, and preparing for interviews that would determine my future. Meanwhile, Sophia's social media provided a constant backdrop of her Canadian adventure. Photos of her in snow-covered parks, videos of her improving French at conversation clubs, posts about weekend trips to Ottawa and Montreal. She looked happy, confident, and completely at home in her international experience. Our parents shared every single one of her posts on their own social media accounts, writing proud captions about their international daughter and their family's global perspective. When relatives asked about me, they would mention that I was doing well in university and working part-time, but the details were always vague, the enthusiasm notably absent. I unfollowed Sophia's social media accounts not out of jealousy, but out of self-preservation. Every photo of her Canadian life was a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd been denied, what I would never experience. 3 months later, I was sitting in my tiny bedroom, working on a consulting project for a Montreal-based company, when the email arrived. Subject: State Department International Leadership Excellence Award. Congratulations. I stared at the subject line for several seconds before opening it, certain it must be a mistake or some kind of spam. But the sender was official, the U.S. Department of State, and the seal in the corner was genuine. Dear Ms. Isabella Washington, congratulations. After extensive evaluation of over 3,000 applications from across the United States, you have been selected as this year's recipient of the State Department's International Leadership Excellence Award. Your application demonstrated exceptional innovation, resilience, and leadership potential. The selection committee was particularly impressed by your ability to create meaningful international professional relationships despite financial limitations, your self-directed language acquisition, and your demonstrated success in cross-cultural business environments. The award ceremony will be held at the State Department in Washington, D.C., with international dignitaries, business leaders, and diplomatic representatives in attendance. You are invited to bring family members to share this celebration. We look forward to recognizing your achievements and discussing the graduate school and career opportunities that our international partners would like to offer you. Sincerely, Ambassador Catherine Morrison, Director of International Education and Cultural Exchange. I read the email 3 times before the words finally penetrated my consciousness. Then I called Professor Martinez, who screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Isabella, do you understand what this means?" she shouted, her excitement crackling through the speaker. "This award is given to one person per year in the entire country. One person out of over 300 million Americans. Companies will be lining up to hire you. Universities worldwide will be offering you graduate programs with full funding." That evening, I sat in my room staring at the official email, reading and rereading the formal language that represented the biggest achievement of my life. The ceremony would be in 2 weeks. Winners were encouraged to invite family members to share the celebration. I thought about my parents, who had spent the last year proudly posting about Sophia's Canadian adventure while barely mentioning my achievements. I thought about the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and expected to figure it out on my own. I thought about being told I didn't deserve the same opportunities as my sister. Maybe it was time they saw exactly what I'd figured out. I picked up my phone and called home. "Mom, it's Isabella. I have something to tell you." "Of course, dear. What is it?" Her voice had that distracted quality it always carried when she talked to me, like she was multitasking, thinking about other things. "I've been selected for an award ceremony at the State Department in Washington, D.C. It's next Friday evening. Would you, Dad, and Sophia like to attend?" The silence stretched for several long seconds. I could almost hear her mental gears turning, trying to process this unexpected information. An award ceremony? At the State Department? What kind of award? It's related to my university work and consulting projects. Nothing too big. I lied smoothly. But I thought you might want to come. I heard her talking to Dad in the background, their voices muffled by her hand over the phone. When she came back on the line, her tone had shifted to something more attentive. "We'll be there," she said finally. "Sophia is flying back from Toronto next week anyway. What should we wear?" "It's fairly formal. Think embassy reception or White House state dinner." After I hung up, I smiled for the first time in months. They had no idea what they were walking into. The week before the ceremony was a blur of media interviews, phone calls from international companies, and preparation meetings with State Department officials. Journalists wanted to know about my inspiring story of self-reliance. Business representatives wanted to discuss partnership opportunities. Graduate program coordinators from universities in Canada, the United Kingdom, and across Europe wanted to schedule admission interviews. Through it all, I maintained the careful silence I'd learned over the years. I didn't tell my parents about the media attention, the business interest, or the scope of what was happening. I let them continue believing this was some minor university recognition, something small enough to fit their limited expectations of me. The ceremony took place in the State Department's Grand Benjamin Franklin Room, a space I'd only seen in photographs accompanying news coverage of international diplomatic events. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors that echoed with elegant footsteps. Diplomats from dozens of countries mingled over champagne and whispered conversations in multiple languages. American government officials in formal attire discussed trade agreements and cultural exchange programs with international business leaders. I arrived early, wearing a black cocktail dress I'd bought with my consulting earnings. Simple, elegant, appropriate for the gravity of the occasion. The other invited guests were impressive. University presidents, corporate executives, cultural attachés, and family members who looked appropriately awed by the grandeur of their surroundings. When the doors opened for family guests at 7 o'clock, I spotted my parents immediately. Dad wore his best charcoal suit, the one reserved for weddings, funerals, and the most important occasions. Mom had chosen her navy blue dress, and the pearl jewelry set that she wore when she wanted to project sophistication and success. They moved through the crowd with careful steps, looking around the room with expressions that mixed appreciation with confusion. Sophia walked beside them, having flown back from Toronto just 2 days earlier. She looked slightly jet-lagged but curious, her phone already out to document the evening for her social media followers who'd been following her Canadian adventure. I watched them from across the room as they found their assigned seats in the family section, still looking around uncertainly, still not quite understanding what kind of event they'd been invited to attend. I saw Mom lean over to whisper something to Sophia, who shrugged and shook her head in response. The ceremony began with remarks from the Secretary of State, a distinguished woman in her 60s, who spoke about America's place in the global community and the importance of developing young international leaders who could represent American values and interests on the world stage. Other officials followed, discussing cultural exchange programs, economic partnerships, and the future of diplomacy in an increasingly connected world. The audience listened politely, but I could see from their body language that my family was beginning to realize this was significantly more important than they'd anticipated. Finally, after 45 minutes of opening remarks and diplomatic presentations, it was time for the main event. "Ladies and gentlemen," the secretary announced, stepping back to the podium with a crystal award in her hands. "Each year, we recognize one exceptional individual who has demonstrated remarkable international leadership while representing the best of American innovation, resilience, and cultural understanding." The room fell completely silent. In the family section, I saw my parents leaning forward, suddenly paying very close attention. This year's recipient has achieved something truly extraordinary. Without any family financial support, without the advantages of international travel or expensive education programs, she has built meaningful professional relationships with companies across 3 continents. Mom's face had gone completely still. Dad's eyebrows were rising slowly as the implications of the words began to sink in. She speaks 4 languages fluently and has successfully helped dozens of American businesses expand internationally. She has completed advanced coursework in international relations while working multiple consulting positions. Her professors describe her as remarkably self-sufficient, innovative, and driven. The phrase, "without any family financial support," hung in the air like an indictment, echoing through the formal ballroom and settling into the consciousness of everyone present. Despite facing financial obstacles that would have deterred most students, she has created opportunities through pure determination and intellectual excellence. She has proven that true international leadership comes not from privilege, but from perseverance. Sophia's mouth had dropped open slightly, her phone forgotten in her lap. Dad's face was flushing a deep red as he began to understand exactly what the announcer was implying about their family's support patterns. "Please join me in congratulating this year's recipient of the State Department's International Leadership Excellence Award, Isabella Washington." The applause was thunderous, filling the ballroom with sound that seemed to reverberate off the marble walls and crystal chandeliers. I stood on legs that felt surprisingly steady and walked toward the stage, each step feeling like vindication for every time they'd told me to figure it out myself, every moment I'd been made to feel less deserving than my sister. From the podium, with C-SPAN cameras recording and White House photographers capturing the moment, I could see everything with perfect clarity. The stunned expressions on my parents' faces, the way Sophia had gone completely motionless in her chair, the flush creeping up Dad's neck as he realized that hundreds of distinguished guests now knew exactly how his family had treated their award-winning daughter. The secretary shook my hand firmly and handed me the crystal award engraved with my name and the year. The weight of it in my hands felt like justice crystallized into physical form. "Congratulations, Miss Washington," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Your achievements under such challenging circumstances are truly remarkable. You should be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished independently." "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady and clear as it carried through the sound system to every corner of the ballroom. I couldn't have done this without learning to be completely self-reliant. The words were deliberately chosen, carefully crafted to make the point without seeming vindictive. The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment for posterity and press coverage that would reach every major American news outlet. The audience applauded again, longer this time, and I stood there holding my award and absorbing the recognition I'd worked so hard to earn. In the family section, My parents sat like statues, finally understanding the full scope of what their independent daughter had accomplished while they poured resources into Sophia's supported adventures. After the formal presentation, the real networking began. Business cards appeared from everywhere as diplomats, international company representatives, and graduate program coordinators surrounded me with opportunities I could never have imagined. The Canadian ambassador to the United States, a sophisticated woman in her 50s with silver hair and impeccable French-accented English, was the first to approach. Ms. Washington, I've been following your consulting work with several Canadian companies. We'd like to discuss graduate opportunities in international relations. Are you familiar with our top programs at the University of Toronto and McGill? I almost laughed at the irony. I'm very familiar with Canadian universities. I've always been interested in studying there. Excellent. We have several full scholarships available for exceptional international students. Based on your profile, I think you'd be an ideal candidate for our most prestigious programs. Behind her, representatives from multinational corporations waited their turn. A senior partner from a global consulting firm wanted to discuss internship opportunities in their Atlanta and Toronto offices. An international development organization was interested in my language skills and cross-cultural experience for their North American programs. As I moved through the crowd, collecting business cards and scheduling follow-up meetings, I kept one eye on my family's slow, uncertain approach through the networking reception. When they finally reached me, standing awkwardly at the edge of a conversation I was having with the European Union's cultural attaché, the silence was deafening. I excused myself politely from the diplomatic conversation and turned to face my parents and Sophia, who looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Mom spoke first, her voice unusually high and strained. Isabella, we had no idea this was so significant. This is incredible. Thank you, I replied calmly. I'm sorry you didn't understand the scope of it beforehand. I know you wouldn't have come if you'd realized what it really was. The words hit their target. Dad cleared his throat repeatedly, his eyes darting around the room full of international dignitaries who now knew exactly how little support his award-winning daughter had received from her family. We're very proud of you, he said finally, the words sounding forced and inadequate. Are you? I asked, keeping my voice gentle but direct. Because for years you've told me that Sophia needed your support more than I did, that I was naturally independent, that I'd figure things out on my own. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, staring at her expensive shoes that had been purchased with the same money that could have funded my exchange program. Bella, I didn't know. You didn't know that I worked 3 different consulting jobs while you were posting pictures from Toronto. You didn't know that I learned French, Spanish, and Portuguese while you were at Canadian ski resorts. You didn't know because none of you ever asked about my life, my work, my achievements. The words weren't delivered with anger or spite. They were simply true, and the truth had weight in this room full of people who understood achievement and merit. Mom reached toward me instinctively, then stopped as she realized that her typical patterns of deflection and excuse-making wouldn't work here. We thought you preferred being independent. No, I said gently but firmly. You taught me to be independent, because it was easier than treating your daughters equally. You convinced yourselves that I needed less because giving me less fit your budget and your preferences better. A distinguished gentleman in a diplomatic uniform approached our group. Excuse me, Miss Washington. The Canadian ambassador would like to continue your conversation about the graduate programs. She has some exciting opportunities to discuss. I smiled at my family one last time, the expression genuine but distant. Excuse me. I have some future opportunities to explore. As I walked away toward conversations about full scholarships, international internships, and career opportunities I'd never dared imagine, I heard Dad whisper to Mom, "How did we not know about any of this?" The question hung in the air behind me like smoke from a bridge I'd finally finished burning. The Canadian ambassador was waiting with a folder full of documents. Ms. Washington, I want to offer you a full scholarship to the University of Toronto's graduate program in international relations, the same university where your sister studied. But this would be a master's degree with a focus on international trade and diplomacy. I stared at her for a moment, processing the beautiful irony of the offer. The same university? Yes, and we'd also like to offer you a position as a research assistant with our consulate office. You'd be working directly with the embassy while completing your studies. When would this begin? as soon as you can get your paperwork processed. We're prepared to expedite your visa and arrange housing in Toronto. I thought about Sophia's Instagram posts from Toronto, all those photos of the campus I'd dreamed of attending, the city I'd researched obsessively during my failed attempts to fund my exchange program. Now I was being offered not just admission to the same university, but a funded graduate degree with professional opportunities she'd never had. I accept, I said without hesitation. Later that evening, my phone began buzzing with messages from my parents. We're so proud of you. Let's talk about this. We want to celebrate properly. But I was already researching apartments in Toronto, the same city where Sophia had spent her golden year abroad. Except this time, I'd be earning my way there with merit and recognition instead of family funding. As I read through the graduate program materials that night, I found myself laughing at the cosmic justice of it all. They'd refused to pay for my exchange program because I was naturally independent and would figure something out. And I had figured it out, but not in the way they'd ever imagined. 3 weeks later, I boarded a plane to Toronto with 2 suitcases, a laptop full of dreams, and a crystal award that represented everything I'd built from nothing. As the plane lifted off from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, I looked down at the shrinking city below and smiled. They'd told me I would figure it out. They'd been right about that part. The first month in Toronto was surreal. I was living in graduate student housing just blocks from where Sophia had spent her undergraduate year, walking the same campus paths she'd photographed, studying in the same libraries where she'd posted selfies. But my experience was completely different. Instead of being a tourist in someone else's academic adventure, I was building my career with every class, every research project, every meeting with consulate officials who treated me as a valued colleague rather than a temporary student. My consulting experience from Atlanta made me immediately valuable to the consulate's trade office. While other graduate students struggled to find relevant internships, I was already working on international agreements, facilitating business negotiations, and building professional relationships that would last my entire career. Within 6 months, I was presenting research to senior diplomats. Within a year, I was being recruited by international organizations that my classmates could only dream of joining. Professor Martinez had been right. The award really had opened doors that most people spend decades trying to access. When Sophia found out through our parents that I was living in Toronto, she reached out via Instagram, asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious to see her reaction to this unexpected role reversal. We met at a cafe near the university, the same campus where she'd spent her study abroad year, except now I was the one who belonged there and she was the visitor. "This is so weird," she said, looking around the familiar space. "I can't believe you're here, at my university." "Your university?" I asked with a gentle smile. She caught herself, laughing nervously. "I mean the university I attended. You know what I mean." We talked for 2 hours. She'd graduated from her Georgia University and was working at a marketing firm in Atlanta, living with our parents while she saved money and figured out her career direction. Her Canadian experience had been wonderful, she said, but hadn't led to the transformative opportunities she'd expected. "I keep seeing your name in international business magazines," she said finally. "Mom forwards me all the articles. You're like, famous now, in a professional way." I shrugged, stirring my coffee. "I'm building a career that interests me. The recognition is nice, but the work itself is what matters. Do you ever think about coming home?" she asked. I looked out the window at the Toronto skyline, at the city that had welcomed my ambitions and rewarded my efforts. This feels like home now. That evening, I video called our parents, something I did once a month out of obligation rather than genuine connection. "Isabella," Mom said, her enthusiasm feeling forced and overcompensated. "We saw the article about you in Essence magazine. We're so proud." "Thank you," I replied politely. "When are you coming home to visit?" Dad asked. "We miss you." I thought about that question carefully. Did they miss me, or did they miss the idea of me? Did they actually want to see me, or did they want to bask in the reflected glory of my unexpected success? "I'm quite busy with work and studies," I said diplomatically. "Maybe during the holidays." But I knew I wouldn't be home for the holidays. I'd been invited to spend Christmas with Professor Martinez, who was visiting her sister's family in Montreal. I'd be with people who valued my company for who I was, not for what my achievements could add to their social media presence. 2 years later, I graduated with honors from the master's program and accepted a position with the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs, specializing in North American trade relations. My starting salary was higher than what most senior professionals in Atlanta earned after decades of experience. On graduation day, my parents flew to Toronto for the ceremony, finally understanding the scope of what I'd built. They sat in the audience, taking pictures and posting proudly about their international daughter, conveniently forgetting the years they'd dismissed my ambitions as unrealistic. During their visit, we had dinner at an expensive restaurant overlooking Lake Ontario. The conversation was polite, surface level, filled with their questions about my work and my apartment and my Canadian life. "We're so proud of how everything worked out," Mom said over dessert. "You've done so well for yourself." "Yes," I agreed. "I figured it out, just like you always said I would." The words carried the weight of everything unsaid, all the years of inequality and dismissal, and being told I was naturally suited for struggle while Sophia deserved support. "Isabella," Dad said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair, "we want you to know that we always believed in you. We knew you were capable of great things." I nodded politely, but I knew better. They'd believed I was capable of surviving, of managing, of finding ways to succeed without their help. That was different from believing I deserved their support. When they left Toronto, hugging me goodbye at Pearson Airport and promising to visit again soon, I felt a sense of closure that had nothing to do with forgiveness or reconciliation. I'd proven to myself, to them, and to the world that their assessment of my worth had been catastrophically wrong. But more importantly, I'd built a life that no longer required their validation or approval. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving yourself right. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't making others apologize. It's reaching a place where their approval no longer matters. And sometimes the most beautiful justice is when the child they thought needed less becomes the one who achieves more than they could ever have imagined. If you've ever had to choose between waiting for recognition and creating your own success, if you've ever been told you don't need as much as others while having to prove you deserve anything at all, share your story below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of turning adversity into triumph.